It started with a phone call, one that came out of the blue from someone we didn't expect to hear from. Sheriff Lawson, a man who had spent his entire career laughing off ghost stories and local legends, was on the other end. His voice was shaky, a tone I had never heard from him before. "I need you guys to look into something for me," he said. "Something's happened out at Stillwater Village." Stillwater. The name alone was enough to send a chill down my spine. The small, isolated community had always been a mystery to outsiders, a forgotten relic tucked away in the middle of nowhere. Most people didn't even realize it existed. But those who did, well, they spoke of it in hushed tones. Rumors had been swirling for years about disappearances, strange occurrences, and an eerie silence that blanketed the village at night. No one had lived there for nearly 2 decades. No one, that is, except for the people who vanished without a trace. Sheriff Lawson refused to tell us over the phone what had happened, only that it was bad enough that the local authorities were too afraid to investigate. As strange as it all sounded, we couldn't resist the pull of the unknown. This was our specialty, solving the unsolvable, going where no one else dared to go. I called the team together that evening. Daniel, Leah, and Marcus. We had solved some pretty bizarre cases before, but there was something about this one that felt darker, more sinister. The sheriff gave us the address, and with little more than flashlights, cameras, and a gut feeling that something was terribly wrong, we set off. It took nearly 3 hours to reach Stillwater, the village tucked deep within the woods, miles from the nearest town. The road was barely more than a dirt path, winding through thick trees that seemed to press in on us from all sides. The farther we went, the quieter it became. The hum of the car engine was the only sound breaking the suffocating silence. As we finally arrived at the edge of the village, something felt off. Stillwater was supposed to be abandoned, but there were lights in the distance, dim, flickering, like the last gasps of life in a place long forgotten. The village itself looked untouched by time, its narrow streets lined with small houses that seemed frozen in a past era. "I thought this place was supposed to be empty," Marcus muttered as we parked the car. He adjusted his camera, already recording. Leah was quiet, her face pale, and she stared out at the darkened windows of the nearest house. "It's not," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Something's here." We grabbed our gear and stepped out into the night. The air was cold and heavy, the silence unnerving, not a single sound. No birds, no wind, nothing, just stillness. We began our investigation at the edge of the village, starting with the sheriff's brief directions. The last people to vanish were a family, a couple with 2 children. They had moved to Stillwater a few months ago, hoping to escape the noise and chaos of city life. But just a few days ago, the sheriff received a frantic call from the wife. She was screaming, saying something had come for them. That was the last anyone heard from her. The family was gone. Their house was the first place we checked. It looked like any other. Small, wooden, with peeling paint and an overgrown yard. But inside, the air felt wrong. As soon as we stepped through the door, a sense of dread washed over us, thick and suffocating. The house was eerily clean. No sign of struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken windows, just silence. Leah wandered towards the living room, her eyes darting around as if she could sense something invisible lingering in the air. "They didn't leave," she said, her voice tight. "They were taken." Daniel shot her a look. "Taken by what?" She shook her head, unable to answer, but as she spoke, Marcus' camera started glitching. The screen flickered, showing brief glimpses of something, shapes, shadows, moving too quickly to catch with the naked eye. "What the hell is that?" Marcus whispered, staring at the screen. Suddenly, Leah gasped. She had found something, a diary, lying on a table as if it had been left there in a hurry. The handwriting was shaky, rushed. We hear it every night. The silence. It's too loud, too thick. It's coming for us. The last entry was even more disturbing. "It's not the darkness we should fear. It's the quiet. When everything stops, that's when it comes. You can't hear it, but it's there, and it never leaves. The moment Leah finished reading, everything changed. The lights outside flickered again, and the silence that had been so thick suddenly felt oppressive, like it was pressing down on us from all sides. And then, we heard it. Or rather, we didn't. The world around us had gone completely, utterly still. No sound. No movement. Even our footsteps seemed muffled, as though the very air had been drained of life. "We need to leave," Daniel said, his voice steady but tense. "Now." But as we turned to go, the front door slammed shut. The windows, every single one of them, were suddenly blacked out, as if something had covered them from the outside. Leah's eyes went wide. "It's here," she whispered, her voice trembling. Marcus pointed the camera toward the door, his hand shaking. On the screen, the shadowy shapes moved again, this time slower, more deliberate. They weren't just shadows. They were figures, and they were getting closer. "Run," I said, my voice barely audible. We bolted for the back of the house, trying to find another way out, but the layout seemed to have shifted. Rooms that shouldn't exist were there, twisting and turning, trapping us in a maze of walls and hallways that didn't make sense. The silence followed us, growing heavier with each passing second, and then we saw them. Figures, shadowy, indistinct, but undeniably human, stood at the end of the hall. Not moving, just watching, waiting. Leah screamed, and Daniel yanked open a door that wasn't there moments before. We tumbled outside into the cold night, gasping for breath as the silence finally broke, replaced by the eerie howl of the wind. We never went back to Stillwater. The village remains there, untouched, abandoned once more. Sheriff Lawson didn't ask us for details. He didn't need to. He just looked at us with those weary eyes, knowing we had seen things no one should ever see. As for the family, they were never found, just like the others who had disappeared before them. Sometimes, late at night, when the world falls eerily quiet, I think about Stillwater, about that silence. Unnatural, oppressive. I wonder what it was that watched us from the shadows. But I don't dwell on it for long, because in that silence, something waits. And the more you think about it, the closer it gets.